At first, they thought she was just another quiet girl, easy to ignore, easy to humiliate. But when they crossed the line, cutting her hair in class, what followed wasn't a meltdown. It was a reckoning. Jada Carter didn't scream. She documented, she exposed, and she forced an entire school to face the truth it had buried for years. This isn't just a story of bullying. It's a story of power, silence, and a girl who refused to be invisible any longer. The morning sun over Silver Pine, Oregon had the kind of hollow brightness that made everything look beautiful, but feel cold. From the backseat of her uncle's rust-red pickup, Jada Monroe watched the rows of perfect houses pass like a film reel she'd seen before. Vinyl siding, white fences, green lawns manicured within an inch of their lives. Each house looked like it was posing for a catalog. Her uncle, Darnell, cleared his throat as they turned into the school lot. Silver Pine High's got good teachers, strong SAT scores. You keep your head down, you'll be just fine. Jada didn't reply. She just stared ahead at the building rising before them. Clean brick, glass doors, flags fluttering outside like someone had planned the photo. The words "Unity through Achievement" were embossed on a polished metal sign beside the entrance. It felt like a lie before she even stepped inside. She hadn't asked to move here. Back in East Oakland, she was known, respected even. But when her mom passed and her father checked out emotionally, her aunt and uncle offered to take her in. They said it would be a fresh start. What they meant was, get her away from the neighborhood they didn't understand. "You want me to walk in with you?" Darnell asked as the truck rolled to a stop. Jada shook her head. "Nah, I got it." Her voice was quiet, but unflinching. She opened the door, adjusted the strap on her backpack, and stepped out into a world that already felt like it had an opinion about her. Inside the main office, the front desk secretary looked startled, then offered a tight smile. "You must be Jayla?" "Jada. Right, sorry. Here's your schedule and locker assignment. Let me call someone to show you around." "I'll find it." The woman blinked, then handed over the paper. "Okay then. Welcome to Silver Pine." Jada didn't bother with small talk. She walked the halls slow but sure, eyes scanning everything. Posters for drama club, banners celebrating lacrosse championships, teachers in khakis and cardigans moving between classrooms. She found her locker, spun the dial with practiced ease, and dropped her bag inside. As she turned, the hallway paused. Not literally, but there was a ripple. Students glanced, whispered, then kept moving. She was used to that kind of reception. It wasn't hostility yet, it was curiosity marinated in assumption. Her first period teacher, Mr. Allen, was a 50-something man with horn-rimmed glasses and a frozen smile. "Class, this is Jada Monroe. Let's give her a warm Silver Pine welcome." There were a few weak claps, a couple of stares that lasted too long. Jada nodded once and made her way to an empty seat near the back. The rest of the morning was a blur of forced enthusiasm and fake smiles. But by lunch, the reality of her place here had sharpened into focus. She entered the cafeteria and immediately felt the sorting. Tables were clearly claimed. Athletes at the center, drama kids by the stage, the AP kids clustered near the windows. She searched for an open spot and headed toward a half-empty table near the side. Before she could sit, someone else slid into the chair with practiced indifference. "Taken," the girl said flatly. Jada didn't respond. She moved to another table, alone, pulled out her sandwich, ate in silence. From across the cafeteria, a boy with a Letterman jacket whispered something to his friend and they both looked her way. Laughed. Tyler Grant, quarterback, son of a local business owner. That kind of kid. She met his gaze. Didn't blink. He smirked, then leaned in to whisper something else. Jada didn't look away. She didn't know exactly what they were planning, but she already knew this school didn't see her as a person. They saw a test. A provocation, a threat wrapped in skin they didn't understand. By her third day at Silver Pine, Jada had already mapped out the invisible rules. Don't sit near the cheerleaders. They'd just glare until you moved. Don't speak first in class. People stared longer if you got the right answer. Don't walk too confidently down the hall. Someone would interpret that as attitude. And above all, don't make them uncomfortable. She didn't expect warmth, but she had hoped for neutrality. Instead, it was like the building itself was pressing against her presence. In second period history, she answered a question about the Civil Rights Act with clarity and poise. Mr. Allen nodded, then added, "Well, yes, but remember, not everything is about race." The words hit like a slap, wrapped in a smile. The class grew quiet. Jada just stared at him, her face calm but her heart pounding. During chemistry, she heard a low voice behind her as she opened her textbook. "Probably learned all this cooking meth with her cousins," someone muttered. She didn't turn, didn't react. But the insult curdled in her stomach. It wasn't even original, just lazy hate dressed up as humor. The teacher said nothing, didn't even pause the lesson. At lunch, it got bolder. A carton of milk slid across the table and stopped just short of her tray. Jada didn't even flinch. But when she looked up, Tyler Grant was watching her again, this time flanked by Morgan Bell, a sharp-tongued senior with a reputation for fake apologies and fake eyelashes. "Oops," Morgan said, smirking. "Must have slipped." Jada picked up the milk, walked over and set it gently in front of Morgan. "Return policy's still good, right?" That cracked a laugh from a few nearby students. Morgan's smirk slipped. Tyler raised an eyebrow. Jada walked away before they could think of a response. Later that day, she opened her locker to find it had been filled with torn paper. Just random garbage at first, crumpled flyers, ripped up worksheets. But as she started pulling it out, she noticed the words, slurs, scribbled in black Sharpie across the shreds. One piece read, "Ghetto trash." Another had a stick figure with braids and a noose. She stood still, frozen by a rage she knew couldn't be released. Not here, not now. A girl down the hall saw her, made eye contact, then turned and walked away. Jada cleaned the mess slowly, methodically, like it didn't hurt, because that's what they wanted, to see it hurt. In gym, during basketball drills, Tyler made a point of brushing too close as he blocked her path. Not hard enough to count as a foul, but clear enough to say you don't belong here. After class, Coach Danvers, a heavy-set man with a whistle addiction, pulled her aside. "Hey Jada," he said, scratching his head. "Noticed you were a little aggressive out there." She blinked. "I didn't touch anybody." He shrugged. "Just keep it cool, okay? No need to play into stereotypes." Jada stared at him for a long moment. The words were acid, but the delivery was syrupy sweet. This school didn't just ignore things, it narrated her existence for her. By the time Friday came, her silence had become armor, her steps measured, her gaze even. But inside, she could feel the threads starting to fray. That afternoon, Vice Principal Laird, a stiff man with a clipboard glued to his hand, stopped her in the hallway. "We've had a few concerns raised about your attitude," he said, eyes narrowing. Jada frowned. "I haven't done anything." "Exactly," he said, "which means you're not trying to fit in, and that's not helpful." She stood there in disbelief. "So now silence is a problem?" "It's the energy you're bringing into the space," he replied, as if that made sense. "We just want everyone to feel safe." Safe. The word twisted like a blade. Jada clenched her jaw. "You mean everyone but me?" He didn't answer, and in that moment, she understood something deeper than any class would ever teach her. This school wasn't built for her success. It was designed for her surrender. It happened on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were the quiet ones, not quite midweek, not quite hopeful, just there. The air outside was overcast, the kind of gray that made the world feel numb. Jada moved through the day like she always did, quiet, calculated. She'd stopped trying to smile at people in the hallways. No one smiled back. In seventh period art, the room buzzed with low conversation and the muted scrape of chairs across tile. The students had been given a free period, which really meant the teacher, Mrs. Finley, was too tired to fight for their attention. Jada sat at the back, sketching in her notebook. Nothing specific, just patterns, shapes, movement. Her pencil scratched lightly, methodically, a rhythm she could control. Then, without warning, it happened. A snip, a tug. Her neck jerked slightly. The room paused. Jada's hand shot up to the back of her head. Her fingers met air where her braid used to be. Another snip. Laughter. She turned. Brent Jamison, one of Tyler's closest lackeys, stood behind her, holding a pair of school-issued scissors in one hand and a thick, severed braid in the other. "Damn," he said, laughing. "It's like a rope. Didn't know your hair was that strong." Around him, a few other students gasped. Most of them laughed. Tyler, sitting on a nearby stool, looked up just in time to see Jada rise to her feet, slowly clutching what was left of her hair. Brent held the braid up like a trophy. "Relax," he said. "It's not like it's real." And just like that, the room exploded in low, cruel chuckles. "Modern art," Morgan smirked from her table. "She can glue it to her sketchbook." Jada said nothing. She just stared at the braid in Brent's hand, then looked at him. Not yelling, not moving. Her hands were at her sides, but her eyes burned. Mrs. Finley finally looked up from her desk. "What's going on back there?" she asked, her tone lazy and unconcerned. Brent quickly dropped the scissors on the table. "Nothing, Miss F, just goofing around." Finley glanced at Jada, then at the braid on the floor. Her brow twitched, maybe with concern, maybe just annoyance. "Jada," she said, "if there's a problem, come see me after class." And just like that, she turned back to her laptop. The moment sat in the air like smoke. Jada didn't pick up the braid. She didn't storm out. She didn't scream. She sat down, carefully, deliberately, and kept drawing. But she wasn't sketching anymore. She was recording. Every angle, every face, every smirk. Her pencil pressed harder now, gouging into the page with every stroke. By the time the bell rang, Brent had gone pale. Maybe he expected her to scream. Maybe he expected tears. She gave him neither. She scooped up the braid, slipped it into her backpack, and walked out without a word. By the time the bell rang, she didn't go home right away. Instead, Jada sat in the back of the 24-hour boxing gym her cousin Daryl ran on the south side. The place still smelled like sweat and tiger balm, the way it had since she was 6. He didn't ask why she was there. He just tossed her a roll of wrap tape. Hands or heart, she wrapped both. Then stepped into the ring, and every jab, every cross, every exhale wasn't about fighting anymore. It was about remembering. "You didn't break me." Later that night, Jada sat on her bed, staring at the severed braid laid out across her pillow like a fallen banner. Her scalp still throbbed from where Brent had pulled it. Her chest ached from holding in every word she'd wanted to scream. But she didn't cry. Instead, she picked up her phone, opened the Notes app, and typed one sentence. "They cut my hair. But they didn't cut me?" The next morning, everyone was waiting for a reaction. They watched her locker like it might explode, watched the cafeteria door like it would open to fire and fury. But when Jada walked in, she wasn't shaking. She wasn't hiding. She wore her curls pulled into a single tight bun, her backpack slung easy over one shoulder, her steps calm, quiet, measured. Her face? Unrateable. She didn't go to her locker first. She went straight to the front office, requested to see Vice Principal Dillard, and calmly said 7 words. "I'd like to file a formal report." Dillard blinked, caught off guard. "For what?" Jada unzipped her backpack, pulled out the braid, held it in the air like evidence. "This was cut off my head during class yesterday. By another student, with scissors, and no teacher intervened." For the first time since transferring to Oakwood, Dillard didn't look bored. He stammered, reaching for a folder, then his glasses. You're saying this happened in class?" "Yes," she laid it on the desk. "And I'd also like to speak to the district equity officer." Dillard swallowed hard. He knew what that meant. By lunch, the rumors had turned into whispers. Some students pointed, others looked away. But no one touched her, no one spoke. "Brent? Gone." Sent home, maybe? Tyler and Morgan sat at the far end of the cafeteria, their usual table now half empty. They whispered, kept their heads down, and Jada sat alone as always, except this time people noticed. A few seats away, two girls from her history class gave her a nod. One even mouthed, "You good?" Jada nodded back. No words, she didn't need them. She didn't need them. That evening, a quiet email pinged into her inbox. Subject line, confidential, incident follow-up. It was from Mr. Alvin Rhodes, the district's new equity officer. He'd only been on staff 6 months. He'd reviewed the hallway footage, the class schedule, and Jada's statement. And he wanted to meet. By Friday, everything started to shift. Mr. Rhodes showed up at school in a slim navy suit, clipboard under his arm, eyes everywhere. He didn't sit in the office, he walked the halls. He watched students. He stopped by Jada's classes and stood in the back. And by the end of the day, 5 students, none of them white, had quietly been pulled for check-in interviews. Principal Monroe tried to downplay it, just routine policy enforcement. But everyone could feel it. Something had cracked. Over the weekend, Jada posted a photo to her private Instagram. A simple black and white shot, her severed braid coiled into a circle on a table. No caption. But in the background, a pair of taped-up boxing gloves hung on the wall. Within 12 hours, the post had been shared over 1,000 times. A student-run page reposted it with the caption, "They cut her braid, but not her strength." It went viral within the district. By Monday, Jada's name wasn't whispered anymore. It was watched. Students she didn't even know started nodding at her in the halls. A freshman girl slipped her a note between periods. "Thank you. My brother goes here too. They used to mess with him. Not anymore." Teachers? Some still looked the other way, but not all. Miss Patel, her English teacher, assigned an in-class essay topic the following week. Describe a moment where you refused to be broken. She didn't mention names. She didn't have to. At home, her mom noticed the change too. Jada had walked in on Friday night and placed the braid on the kitchen table. Her mother, usually too exhausted to react, stared for a full minute, then quietly said, "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." It was the closest she'd ever come to saying, "I'm proud of you." That night, as rain tapped the window, Jada opened her notebook, not to sketch, but to plan. She made a list, names of students who reached out, teachers who supported her, places where cameras didn't cover, teachers who always seemed to miss the bullying. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about systemic visibility. By now, she understood. They weren't afraid of her fists. They were afraid of her voice, and she was about to use it. This section brings closure, but not comfort. It's where Jada becomes undeniable, where her voice triggers not just acknowledgement, but reckoning. It's not just about retribution, it's about transformation. The press conference wasn't Jada's idea, it was Mr. Rhodes. He called it a transparency milestone and asked if she'd be willing to speak. Just a few minutes. The district was already drafting an apology. The footage had been reviewed. Investigations were underway, and Brent, along with 2 others, had been suspended indefinitely. But Jada knew what this really was: damage control. An apology without ownership. A PR move, not a cultural shift. So she said yes, but on one condition. "I don't want to speak for the district. I want to speak to the students." Rhodes nodded. Understood. The day of the press conference, Jada wore a dark blazer over a plain t-shirt. Hair pulled back, no jewelry, no dramatic makeup, just her. The Oakwood auditorium buzzed with cautious energy. Rows of folding chairs lined with board members, press, and student government reps. Principal Monroe opened with stiff regret. "We failed to act in time. We acknowledge the hurt caused." His voice was paper-thin, apologetic, empty. Then Mr. Rhodes introduced Jada. A student who didn't just speak up, she stood when no one else did. And Jada stepped forward. She didn't take the podium, didn't need it. She stepped past it, closer to the audience. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. My name is Jada Carter. You know what happened to me. You've seen the footage, but what you haven't seen is the hallway the day after. The silence, the way people looked away, or worse, through me. A few students glanced at their shoes. This isn't just about hair. It's about dignity. It's about how easy it is to treat someone like they don't belong, and how hard it is to be the one who stays anyway. She paused. I don't need your pity. I needed your presence, and for too long, I was alone. Now her voice lifted. But I'm not anymore, because truth doesn't stay buried forever, and silence can be broken. She stepped back. No flourish, no tearful finale, just power, the kind that didn't ask for applause. It commanded respect. And this time, the room rose, not for her pain, but for her strength. That night, the clip went viral. It wasn't the school board statement. It wasn't Monroe's apology. It was her words. Truth doesn't stay buried forever. It was reshared over 600,000 times by the end of the week. In the days that followed, change came, not like thunder, but like a rising tide. Brent's family withdrew him from the district. Tyler and Morgan's families filed complaints of their own, claims of unfair punishment, of reverse discrimination. But the tide had already turned. Students came forward. Old complaints were reopened. Teachers who looked the other way were asked to step down from leadership positions. One, who had once told Jada to just ignore it, quietly resigned. An equity committee was formed, and Jada was asked to join. She declined. I already did the hard part, she told Mr. Rhodes. Now it's your turn to do the work. But that didn't mean she disappeared. Jada stayed visible. Not loud, not aggressive, just present. She helped another girl, Layla, file a report when she was harassed after class. She sat in the front row of a student council meeting when they debated new safety protocols. She mentored 2 freshmen during lunch, kids who reminded her of herself a year ago. And when someone cracked a joke behind her back in the hallway, she didn't turn. She just said, loud enough for others to hear, try harder, and kept walking. At home, her mom had started asking questions again, about her day, her friends, her future. Sometimes she'd linger in the kitchen doorway while Jada did homework. Not to hover, just to be there. It wasn't healing yet, but it was something new. Recognition, connection, maybe even pride. The last week of school, Principal Monroe pulled Jada aside in the hallway. He looked tired, older, and for the first time, unsure. I mishandled this. I let too much slide. Jada didn't say anything. He cleared his throat. I'll be stepping down at the end of the semester. She blinked. That she hadn't expected. It's time for someone else. Someone who's been paying more attention than I have. He nodded once and walked away. And Jada turned to see Mr. Rhodes watching from down the hall. Not with approval, with respect. The summer came. Jada didn't relax. She trained, wrote, planned, started working on a short documentary with a local filmmaker, titled, The Silence Was Never Empty. She didn't win everything, but she changed everything that mattered. Her silence had once protected her. Now it powered her. And as she walked out of Oakwood High for the final time that year, someone called after her from the main steps. Yo, Jada, what now? She looked over her shoulder, smiled. Now I teach someone else how to watch. And just like that, she disappeared into the sun. But the story? It stayed, etched into the halls. The policy, the truth, forever unignorable. What is the lesson of this story? 1. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's preparation. Jada's restraint wasn't passive. It was intentional. She chose the moment to speak, and when she did, it couldn't be ignored. 2. Power thrives in systems. so real change must confront them. Her story wasn't just about individual bullies. It was about a culture that allowed cruelty to go unchecked. True justice demanded more than punishment. It demanded transformation. Number 3, the first step to healing is visibility. By telling the truth and insisting it be heard, Jada forced others to finally see what they had ignored for years. 4, you don't need to yell to lead. Leadership can look like calm, like clarity, like showing others where the cracks are and giving them a map to do something about it. 5, change doesn't need permission. It starts when someone refuses to be invisible any longer. Someone like Jada. What would you do if this happened to you or someone you love? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your voice. What do you think about this story? Let's comment below to discuss. And don't forget to subscribe our channel to listen to more interesting stories.